In the previous video, we looked at 4 recent cases of senior police officers who appeared to be hopelessly incompetent. Here, Dr. Stephen F. Myler, Ph.D., examines each case in the light of psychological factors based on the work of Norman Dixon. On reflection, applying psychological concepts to analyze these case studies reveals the underlying dynamics that contribute to incompetence in senior police leadership. The case studies you provided can be seen as manifestations of a system where authoritarianism, fear of failure, rigid thinking, and parochialism are not just personal traits, but embedded organizational pathologies. So, here are 3 historical examples of senior police incompetence in the UK that reflect similar themes to those we saw in the recent cases. Let's start with the Hillsborough disaster. On April 15, 1989, 97 Liverpool fans died as a result of crushing at the Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. In the aftermath, the police response and subsequent cover-up demonstrated a concerning level of authoritarianism and incompetence. At the time, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe was the Chief Superintendent of South Yorkshire Police, tasked with overseeing crowd safety at the match. When faced with the unfolding disaster, he reverted to a classic authoritarian mindset. Maintaining a rigid adherence to the established hierarchy and command and control structure, he failed to effectively communicate with his superiors and other emergency services, leading to a general shambles. Despite eyewitness accounts indicating the severity of the situation, he did not declare a major incident until several hours after the disaster, a critical delay that hindered the emergency response. Later, in a BBC interview, he stated categorically that he had not ordered police officers to remove fans from the already overcrowded pens. This misleading statement reflects not only his personal failing, but also the wider organizational culture where authority figures were expected to maintain a unified, unassailable front, irrespective of the truth. This authoritarian instinct contributed to the false narrative that blamed the fans for causing the crush. A narrative that the police maintained for years. The desire to protect the institution's reputation led to a systemic failure to acknowledge the police's role in the tragedy. From an authoritarian perspective, the primary concern was not public safety or the loss of life, but rather upholding social order and the established authority of the police. Their concern was less with the truth and more with controlling the narrative to protect themselves. This tendency to control the narrative rather than seek the truth is a hallmark of authoritarian systems and was on full display at Hillsborough. Another example of such rigid thinking and fear of failure can be seen in the case of Dame Cressida Dick, the former Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and the Daniel Morgan murder inquiry. Daniel Morgan, a private investigator, was murdered in 2006. His body was found 12 days later in a shallow grave in a woodland area in Hampshire. Despite numerous investigations, nobody has ever been convicted of his murder. In 2018, a newly appointed independent panel overseeing the inquiry discovered that the Met had systematically concealed or denied its failings in the case, leading them to conclude that the Metropolitan Police was institutionally corrupt. Dame Cressida Dick's predecessor, Lord Blair, refused to participate in the inquiry, citing legal advice that suggested the inquiry lacked independence. This was despite the inquiry being established under the Inquiries Act 2008, a primary piece of legislation for public inquiries in England and Wales. The Met's consistent efforts to obstruct the inquiry highlight a profound fear of organizational failure. Each refusal to engage with the inquiry was less about a genuine legal argument and more about a desperate attempt to avoid admitting past errors and their ongoing consequences. This behavior is textbook defensive avoidance, a common strategy in authoritarian and hierarchical organizations. It represents a failure to learn from past mistakes, and a persistent drive to protect the organization's reputation. The Met's relentless pursuit of this reputational protection reveals a psychology of fear. It is a fear of exposing past failures, of acknowledging the inadequacy of past actions, and of admitting to the deceased family that the police had failed in their duty. The resistance to the inquiry's work demonstrates an institutional reluctance to confront uncomfortable truths. This defensiveness and fear of failure suggest a toxic organizational culture that prioritized the Met's brand over the pursuit of justice and accountability. The case of Chief Constable Vanessa Jardine and the 2019 Brighton Pride Parade illustrates the dangers of rigid thinking and parochialism in leadership. Jardine, then Assistant Chief Constable of Sussex Police, made the irrational decision to ban Sussex Police from attending the city's Pride Parade, ostensibly due to a misinterpretation of the public sector equality duty. Her decision was overturned after a judge ruled that she had proceeded on the basis of an error of law. This case is a textbook example of rigid thinking. Instead of engaging in a nuanced, flexible analysis of the law and the unique circumstances of the event, she adopted a rigid, black-and-white interpretation of the law, refusing to acknowledge any complexities or alternative viewpoints. Her decision was based on a flawed understanding of the law, highlighting an inability to adapt her thinking to a new and evolving context. Her parochialism lay in her narrow focus on law enforcement and her apparent dismissiveness of social issues and the LGBTQ community's concerns. She failed to appreciate the broader social context of the event and the importance of community engagement and inclusion. By making this binary call, she disregarded the potential harm and offense that her decision would cause to a vulnerable section of society. Her decision was driven by a literal interpretation of the law rather than a thoughtful consideration of the spirit of the law and the principles of equality and inclusion. Such rigid thinking and parochialism demonstrate a cognitive and emotional inflexibility that is detrimental to effective leadership, particularly in an increasingly complex and diverse world. Finally, let's examine the case of Chief Constable Nick Adderley and his fabrication of a military record. In 2022, it was revealed that Adderley, the Chief Constable of Bedfordshire Police, had lied about having served in the armed forces. He claimed to have been a captain in the Royal Military Police, having served in Northern Ireland and Kosovo, when in reality he had no such experience. He was fined £2,000 after pleading guilty to 2 counts of dishonestly making a gain by deception. This case is a glaring example of parochialism combined with rigid thinking and fear of failure. Adderley's focus was not on finding the best candidate for the role, but on portraying himself in a certain light to meet the force's requirements. His parochial view of the job limited his perspective and prevented him from considering other candidates who might have been better suited to the role. His insistence on sticking to his false narrative even after being challenged suggests a profound fear of failure. Admitting to lying would mean acknowledging a mistake and deviating from the carefully constructed image he had presented to the force. This fear of failure led to a doubling down on the lies, creating a situation that spiraled out of control. The fact that his lies went undetected for so long highlights a culture of groupthink within the force. The desire for harmony and conformity may have led to a collective blindness, where the leadership's questionable actions were not critically examined. His colleagues may have been reluctant to question his story, because it fit well with the narrative of the force, and because challenging it would have risked disrupting the internal cohesion of the team. This groupthink phenomenon likely emboldened Adderley to continue his deception. The combined effects of rigid thinking, parochialism, and fear of failure resulted in a situation where a man with a fabricated military record was placed in charge of one of the country's police forces. These historical cases of police incompetence share similarities with the contemporary examples we explored in our previous videos. They all point to a deeper systemic issue within the police force, a systemic issue that needs to be urgently addressed. The cases point to a culture that tolerates and even encourages authoritarianism, fear of failure, rigid thinking, and parochialism. These are not merely individual failings, but deeply ingrained organizational pathologies that undermine the police's ability to serve and protect the public effectively. To truly reform and improve, the police must confront these issues head-on, fostering a culture of transparency, accountability, empathy, and open-minded critical thinking at every level. Only then can they begin to rebuild trust with the communities they serve and uphold the high ethical standards demanded of them. If you enjoyed this video, please show your support, and don't forget to subscribe for more insightful mental health discussions. Thank you for watching. In Part 3, we will examine some cases from the past and how modern policing is changing to meet the demands of a more intelligent force. Written and edited by Dr. Stephen F. Myler, Ph.D.